Hi, and welcome to SiFi Garden. Are you ready for a hydroponic method that will allow you to grow full-size plants in your home, or grow kale for 2 years or more? I'm not quite sure exactly how old this guy is, but I'm pretty sure he's at least 2 years old, probably older. The SiFi Garden method doesn't use any pumps, so there are no moving parts, there's no pump noise. The lighting that we use is minimal, a fraction of what other systems use, because we understand that when you reduce the distance from the light to the plant by 50%, you also get a fourfold more light. So rather than putting a light that's a couple feet above the plant, we're trying to get the light down to about 6 inches above the plant and provide it all the light that it needs. These tomatoes, for instance, have not only put out flowers, but also become ripe in a 6,000 Kelvin bulb that you can buy readily rather than a fancy grow bulb. So the SiFi Garden method is about simplicity, it's about minimalism, and it's also about reusability and protecting the environment. So when you look at other hydroponic methods that use things like these Grodan rock cubes, this is rock. This never breaks down. This will never go away. It'll never be anything other than rock. You also have these rapid rooters, which are great. These actually do break down biologically, but these cost about 32 cents a piece for each plant. The Grodans cost about 38 now. I paid, I think, $1 back in the day when I started playing with them. And I wanted a method that was less expensive. So what you're seeing is actually the end of 12 years of experimentation, trying different hydroponic methods, looking for something that was fault tolerant. So if the power goes out, the plants don't just up and die, that they can continue to live on, that they can get some light from the windows or whatever. And they may not be growing as well, but they're not going to die. I also wanted a sit it and forget it garden, which is where the name comes from. It stands for sit it and forget it garden, SiFi Garden. And it also has the other connotation of the gardens we always saw in science fiction, where you could feed huge amounts of people using hydroponic gardening. They always talked about it, but we've never seen anything that really does that for all sorts of plants. And the SiFi Garden method actually provides that method. The other important thing is the cost. So when we replant as if we were planting outside, except instead of having to add nutrients and add other things to our soil to enrich it again, since we're using hydroponics, all we have to do is just plant the seeds in the grow media and follow the normal instructions for germinating those seeds. The other thing that I'm really trying to focus on is that you can grow anything. You need space. So like a full-size tomato, it needs a 5-gallon bucket size area for its roots at a minimum, and potentially more. So when you start growing something like a tower garden system, it doesn't take long before the roots actually plug the whole system up, because it has an extensive root system that it needs. And so what we really need is a container that matches that. In SiFi Garden, because each plant is in its own container and they can share light, it gives us the ability to allow each plant to have the space that it needs for its root system, and at the same time, in many cases, share light. So for instance, these tomatoes behind me are getting most of their light, nearly all of their light, from the shelf. At one time, I did have a little bit of additional light on them, but only another 10 watts of power for 2 cherry tomato plants, or 2 Tiny Tims. These actually are Tiny Tim tomato plants, and they're over a year old. I planted them last year, February, March, something like that, and now it's March of 2026 already. So they're a full year old, and they're still producing flowers, they're still producing fruit, and all of that's happening not with fancy grow bulbs, but with simple 6,000 Kelvin shop lights. And the shelf you see behind me has only 20 watts of power on that shelf, and it's taking care of all the plants on the shelf as well as the tomatoes. And in upcoming videos, I'm going to show you some plants that have actually had too much sun, too much light from these simple 20-watt bulbs that they were actually too bright for them. And I've had to do several things to kind of back things down. I had a nice silver reflector on the back and I had to remove it. So as we work through this thing of testing the system, proving it out, I've spent 12 years to get to this point where I have a system that I'm pretty sure checks all my boxes and works consistently. And we're going to now prove that together, and I want to share that with you. The other advantage is that we also allow plants to be isolated. So if one plant gets sick because it has some kind of disease, it doesn't kill everybody else. And then when we get done, we simply sanitize the grow media that we're growing in, and it's ready to go again, be planted and grow something else. So everything is pretty much recyclable. The only real consumables in the system are seeds, nutrients, and water. So let's take a minute and talk about what SiFi Garden is. SiFi Garden is a drain-to-waste wicking hydroponic system. By combining the two, we can build a system that is completely reusable and uses a minimum of nutrients as well as water. So the main setup, we're currently testing a bucket inside a bucket type of system, which you can see a wick on the bottom of this one, and then there are holes, a minimum number of holes in the bottom of the container. And then you have the second container to hold the overflow. So what would normally be discarded in a drain to waste system, we're holding on to and reusing. And the way that system works is the grow media itself, rather than being straight cocoa cure, which is often what's used with drain to waste, is actually 90% perlite, 10% cocoa cure. So we want enough cocoa cure that it holds a little bit of water and it makes sure the water gets distributed out well to the plant, but we don't want excessive amounts of cocoa cure because it tends to slow down the growth of plants, as well as it causes other issues because cocoa cure is a sponge and it literally sponges up everything, including your nutrients. So in a 1 quart cup, which is container, which is what this is, we're going to normally add 1 cup of water to it during our planting. So we're going to add a cup of water. We're going to wet it all the way down through. Some of it will run into the bottom, the base. Oftentimes not, because this will actually hold very close to a full cup of water. And then you'll place your seeds in the top, cover them over, cover the top of the container so that no air can get in or around. And what that really is for is to make a very humid area in there for the seeds, because that's what they're going to need to germinate. Then once they germinate, which is normally 3 to 4 days, they're good in there until it's time to water again. So that's typically 2 weeks. So your first 2 weeks basically is run entirely on water. Then at the end of 2 weeks, we begin a watering routine. And the watering routine is for every 3 weeks that we water with nutrients, we're going to then water 1 week with just plain water. And I'll talk about that in a little more detail in a bit. But the key to the nutrients is we're using Dynagrow Grow and Dynagrow Bloom, which are now Thrive, Super Thrive, Dynagrow, and Super Thrive Dynagrow Bloom. And these nutrients I've found to be good because they are completely, they don't have any extra enzymes or anything like that. It's just all the chemicals that the plant needs in order to grow well. And so I've been testing with this specific nutrient. Other nutrients may work, but the key thing is that the concentration is only a 1/4 teaspoon of nutrients per gallon, and then 1/8 of a teaspoon of Epsom salts. I recommend adding to that, just so you have a little more magnesium so your plants get a little greener. So for every 3, and then that 4th one, you're going to water with a cup of water, and you water it basically when the weight of the container gets down to close to a 1/4 cup of water, somewhere between a 1/2 cup and a 1/4 cup, so that there's only a 1/4 cup of water left in the media itself. Plants have very, very little weight. If you have a trellis on a plant, you're going to need to factor in the trellis. But when you get down to that level, then you're going to want to add water back in, and it's 1 cup for every quart of grow media. So if you have a 1 gallon bucket, you're going to put in 4 cups of water. If you're going to have a 2 gallon bucket, you're going to put in 8 cups of water and let it drain down through and just sit in this reservoir down below. And then these wicks will then lift the water up. Now the wicks are also special. The wicks we're using is polypropylene rope. I found that using nylon or polyester, which I really like, was bringing up too much water. They're wicking up too much water. The polypropylene works more like cotton. And the reason we're using polypropylene instead of cotton rope is that most of our plants live anywhere from 6 months to a year. And cotton's usually pretty good for a couple months, 2 months, maybe 3 months. And once you get beyond that, it starts rotting. And rotting things in hydroponics is not normally a good situation. So to be as safe as possible, we're trying to use all synthetic wicks for this. Plus the wick is then entirely reusable. Now our fourth feeding is going to be a flush. So what you would do is put 1 cup of plain water in here and let it run all the way down through your container and wash out all the excess salts. So my recommendation is put in a cup, let it wash down through, and let it sit for about an hour. That gives everything a chance to dissolve and come down through, plus any waste products from the plants are also going to end up in that water that's in the bottom of that lower container. Then you would take that container out, you would dump it out, and then pour a 1/2 cup of water on the top. And that will then put basically a 1/2 cup of water down here. Again, 1 quart of grow media that you have. And that normally lasts 2 weeks. Larger plants, it oftentimes lasts more, maybe 3 weeks. You'll go between waters, 3 to 4 weeks sometimes. But the smaller quart size plants, every week and a half to 2 weeks. So I normally recommend that you check them once a week. Now the other thing you can do with your water that you add, that 1/2 cup, is if you want to mix a special gallon where you put 1 teaspoon of hydrogen peroxide in a gallon of water. So it has that hydrogen peroxide, which will actually kill things like algae, bacteria, as well as it helps to oxygenate the roots. If you want that, then that would be the time to use that and do that. Otherwise, just plain water works fine. If you're going on vacation, let's say you're going on vacation, it's not time to water your plants yet. What I recommend is go into all your plants and top them up so that the reservoir is full. And you can look at it. In my buckets, I put a line down there at actually a 1/4 cup. And the top of the line is a 1/2 cup. But basically what you're going to do is add water to the top of each plant, just plain water, and let it drain down until your reservoirs are all full on all of your plants. And once you have that, then you should be good to go away for 2 weeks, come back, and start up your regular feeding cycles wherever everybody is. If you need more water in the summertime, because oftentimes in the summertime it's hotter, plants are consuming more water, just add water, don't add nutrients. So we're going to do nutrients essentially every other week is going to be our general thought, or every other time we get down to the place where it's time to water them again. As far as harvesting goes, this lettuce is a good example of that. Rather than killing the plant, normally you grow a huge lettuce and then you cut it off and you kill it and then you have to store it in your refrigerator. With the SiFi Garden method, my recommendation is to, if you can see here, I've cut off these lower leaves and I've kept going around and just cut off the leaves. And as I use the lower leaves, the center leaves then grow out and the plant continues to grow. And that allows us to get the maximum life out of it. The lettuce is normally 8 to 12 weeks. At 12 weeks, normally they're old. When you cut the leaves, you'll see white coming out. And when you see white coming out of the leaves, you know that they're going to start getting bitter. And so that's the time that week is going to be the week that you're going to want to kill that plant. But other plants like kale, I've had kale for a couple years. I've had parsley for several years. I've had basil for over a year and never had a problem with them. And then when you do cut plants back, what you want to try to do, let me get a sample here. So here is a parsley. And how I keep this from bolting is parsley, we keep it out of hot lights, which most of the grow lights for some reason want to get the plants as hot as possible, which causes them to bolt. But you'll notice I have 1, 2, 3, 4 branches on this guy. And I think the oldest one is this branch right here. And so what I would normally do is I would cut this oldest branch off, and I would always leave at least 3. So more, I would only take 1 in this case. But if I had more than 1 leaf, like let's say I had an additional leaf here, I had 5 of them, and I need 2, I could take up to 2, but I won't take more than that. If I only need 1, I'm only going to take 1, and I'll leave the other 4 there and let them grow out. And then again, take the largest one and just keep cutting the plant back, but never fewer than 3 leaves. Because when you have 3 leaves in here, they tend to push out faster and grow faster. And that applies to everything. Now, lettuce is a little bit strange because it's kind of hard to cut them back to 3 leaves oftentimes. You just cut them back to the core and then you let the core grow out. And in fact, I can show you an example of that. So here's a less than happy lettuce. You see it's got some nice tip burn here because the nutrients I was putting in here were too concentrated. And so I decided, well, let's just put some in and let's see if we can get you grow the plants without adding any nutrients. And there's still too much nutrients for them. But here, this is romaine lettuce. And so I'm just cutting out around the outside, as you can see right there, the leaves and leaving the inner leaves. And then as they grow out, these are trying to grow together, but they'll grow out. I'm going to have another one of these romaines like this, except instead of in a 6-inch pot, I'm growing it in a 1-gallon pot. And that one I think is going to be a lot better because these are not tall enough. They're supposed to be this tall. And they're not getting to full size because the roots are being restricted by this quart container. But I wanted to try them in a quart container just to see how that would work. Again, we're experimenting. We're trying to see what the limits are of this system. And also, if somebody over fertilizes, what advice can we give them? And how is that going to play out for them? Rather than necessarily just taking the easy route and saying, kill the plant, wash all the nutrients out as best you can, and plant them again. I'd like to have alternatives. So with the SiFi Garden method, we're trying to harvest, grow as we need, eat as we need, and be continuously harvesting until a plant gets to the place where it can no longer go on. So parsley is fine for multiple years. Lettuce, again, 8 to 12 weeks. It's the only plant I know of that I definitely have to kill. I've had peppers for 2 years, so I'm just not a real into end of season killing plants because they put out new shoots, put out new leaves, or they put out new fruit, flowers and fruit. And I'm against killing them unless I have to. Now, sometimes the roots are root bound and it's that time. But short of them being root bound, there's nothing wrong with letting a plant live longer, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, SiFi Garden, we're going to harvest plants as long as we can. When we do get to the end of life, so a plant has a problem, a plant dies for some unknown reason, maybe it gets too hot. Heat is one of the biggest killers. If there was a way to have a room in your house at 68 degrees consistently, you'd have the most wonderful plants ever. And they would grow all summer long, and you could grow really anything because everything will grow at 68 degrees. When you get to 70 and above, you start talking about warm weather plants. So things like parsley is a cold weather plant. Broccoli normally is a cold weather plant. I've got some broccoli that I'm going to be testing that was made in Brazil. And it's supposed to grow between 70 and 80 degrees. So it should be fine in the summertime here where I'm at. But we'll find out. So anyhow, to conclude this, when you're done with a plant and it's time to kill it, you're going to cut the top of the plant off. You're going to put a cup of water in here. You're going to let it drain down to the bottom. You're going to let it sit for about an hour or more, ideally. Then you're going to pour out the water in the bottom of the pot. If you want to pour a little more in the top and run it down through, that's fine. But that will take out all the excess nutrients that are in the grow media. Then what I normally do is take that material and put it in a 9x13 pan. And the only reason I'm using 9x13 pans is that they're really common and they're fairly deep and they hold 4 quarts of material. And then you take that material. I normally let it sit out for a couple weeks and dry out. And I'll dig around in it a little bit just to kind of take the wet on the bottom and bring it up to the top and the dry on the top and put it down to the bottom. And then I'll put it in the oven. I'm going to bake it for 2 to 4 hours at 200 degrees. This is very important, only 200 degrees. So we're just trying to get the grow media up to 195 degrees, which will kill all bacteria, all viruses, and any algae or other type fungal growth that's in there. So we're just trying to get to 195 degrees to sanitize it. Once the media is sanitized, you're all set to then scoop it out, put it into a new pot, and go through the whole process of seeding and growing whatever you want to grow. So things like lettuce, you're going to constantly have that rotating because, again, lettuce is about think in terms of an 8-week crop. If you can get a little more than 8 weeks, that's fantastic, but normally 8 weeks. So 4 weeks to get to a size where you can start eating it, and by 8 weeks, it's usually as big as it's going to be, and then somewhere after 8 weeks, it goes downhill. So different lettuces have different times on them, so you'll just have to look at the lettuce that you're growing and make your own judgment. But those things are going to rotate all the time. Other plants are going to be around for longer, and so that's why that purge cycle, every 4th watering, to just plain water and purge out, throw away what comes through to get rid of any excess nutrients or any waste products from the plants. And then you're good. And that's SiFi Garden. So I ask you to click the subscribe if you want to be notified. And I'm going to be keeping folks up to date on what we're doing. As I prove out various things, I'm going to be releasing some PDFs and whatnot on how to actually build the various things that we have that we're testing. And let's have some fun. I'm looking forward to seeing what we can do with this, what kind of a community we can build. I know there's a lot of people that want to grow full-size plants, and I believe this is the system to do that in your apartment, which I have, or your home.